All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit about memos. Your chapter does a pretty good job, but it goes over just the very basics. There's some good images of memos that you can study and help you when you do the assignments. Memos are purely internal, meaning that they are meant for someone at the company to read, and they're written by someone at the company, right? So they're not meant for customers, they're meant for people who work there. Now, the other thing that's important about memos is that they generally announce important information. They're more formal than an email. You could definitely tell people in an email at work, and people do it all the time, like, hey, here's a new policy change. But a much more formal way of saying, here's a new policy change, is a memo. The other thing that's important about memos is that they do have legal ramifications. They are official correspondence. There has been cases where a company was accused of doing something bad that they denied doing, and then in court, memos that they had written proving that they were talking about this bad thing came to light. Memos are official company business in many cases, so they hold up in court as something you did. So they have legal ramifications. Memo can be written to a specific person from a specific person, but a lot of times it's written like to a group of people or to a division or something like that. So I just want to go over a couple of example memos and point out some basic stuff to show you what good memos do and what not good memos do. Okay? Now, this is a memo that I got in my email, and it used to be that memos were printed and handed to you, but now with the increasing use of technology, you often get your memos emailed to you. But it is not an email, it is a memo, and you know that because it's still labeled as such here, and that's a way of saying this is official policy that whoever is sending it is sending. Now, there is a heading here because this is from a major company, but memos do not always have to have headings and often do not. It depends on the rules at your company. Now, even though this is an email, they've still written out the to, from, date, and subject because it's a memo. Underneath the title memorandum, you still write this all out. Okay, and memos are often addressed to a specific person, but because of their very nature of being official policy, they're often addressed to a group of people, in this case, the university community, meaning everybody at FIU. If you have a title, you would want to include it, as this person did here. So it's from Jose Vargas. I have no idea who Jose Vargas is because FIU is so big, but he's gone ahead and identified himself as the master electrician. Okay, and then a few things I want to point out about this memo. Even though it's very short, there's a lot of very good things happening here. Number one, the subject is very specific. Students often have a desire to put one word as a subject, like power, and keep us guessing what the subject of the memo or email is. In this case, they've very much identified the subject as a power shutdown in the OE building. So even before I've read the memo, I can identify as a reader, do I need to keep reading? If I don't even know where the OE building is, I might not read any more of this memo. If I use the OE building all the time, I'm going to keep reading. Also notice that there's no dear so-and-so because this is not an email. Okay, a memo just starts. And the memo introduces the subject in the first sentence. In order to complete the permanent repair of electrical service to the OE building, normal utility power to the building will be shut down on Saturday, August 4th at 7 a.m. So in this very first sentence, they've told me why they're shutting down the building, what day they're shutting down the building, and what time it'll start. The only question I might still have is when will it come back? And they tell me that in the very next sentence. So this very short first paragraph is giving me a lot of information. Then in the next paragraph, they give me some additional information. The occupants of the building should make sure to turn off all computers, printers, copiers, and other equipment on Friday before the shutdown. And during the shutdown, by the way, the AC is not going to be working. So now I know, oh yeah, duh, I should not even go work in there, even if I don't need the computer, because the AC is not going to be working. Then at the end of the memo, there is what I like to call the strong closing, something that signifies that the memo is ending. Okay, in this case, they've told us if we have questions, we can contact Jose Vargas, and thank you in advance for your cooperation. And notice that there's no signature at the end, no sincerely so-and-so, the memo just ends. Also note that these are all block paragraphs. None of the paragraphs are indented. Instead, the lines are skipped so that we can tell where one paragraph ends and the next one begins. Also note that these paragraphs are no longer than they have to be, and every time the subject is changed, we start a new paragraph, right? Just because the paragraph is short doesn't mean it's not over. So in this case, they're telling us that there's a power outage. In this paragraph, they decide to tell us what we need to know to prepare for the power outage. In this paragraph, they tell us who to contact if we have questions. And this paragraph, they thank us for our cooperation. They resist the urge to put all of this together in one big paragraph just because the paragraphs are short. In this next memo, here's another example, and it does a lot of the same good things. Identifies itself as a memo. It's written to the entire programming division. In this case, it's written from Vice President Lundberg. And the subject is specific, attaching cover sheets to TPS reports. If I don't use TPS reports, I can go ahead and maybe ignore this memo, but if I do use TPS reports at work, I need to keep reading. Again, there's no dear so-and-so, and again, there's no sincerely so-and-so because it's not an email or a letter, okay? The subject is very specific, TPS reports, and then the first sentence tells us what this is about. This is to remind the division that starting today, we are now filing all testing procedures, specification reports with new cover sheets. Okay, why do we need this change? The reason for the change is simple. In addition to the new format, the cover sheets provide a summary of the report as well as updated legal copy. Okay. And then please do this. Though the change may initially seem like a headache and an extra step, it is necessary to include them. Failing to do so will result in a confusing and inaccurate product delivered to our customers. And then the strong closing, please be sure to follow this new procedure. So you've gotten everything you needed to know with the most important information at the beginning and a strong closing at the end, and additional details in the middle that help me understand why we're doing this and how it's going to work, okay? And then here's a bad memo, and this memo is going to be part of an assignment for you this week, but this is an example memo that was really sent out by a Microsoft executive to his employees in 2014 when there were massive layoffs. And you can see the memo is 3 pages long. On top of that, incorrectly signs the end of the memo and incorrectly starts with a salutation. On top of that, the salutation is incredibly informal, especially considering you're telling me I'm fired. Hello there. So that's not an appropriate way to start. If you read over this memo, which you should do, you'll see that a lot of the talk of this memo is Microsoft strategy, so on and so forth. And they're telling me all about the things that Microsoft has done in this past to be successful, the problems they're facing, what they need to do to save the company. And it's a very me-centered attitude in the sense that the memo is very concerned with Microsoft's success, Microsoft's goals. But I am reading this as a reader, and I need to understand why I'm being fired, that I am being fired, and what the next steps are. And this horrible memo is focused on Microsoft and doesn't even identify that I am being fired until about here in the memo. We expect there to be some changes that will impact our team structure. And then it's not until down here that they actually basically indicate that people are going to be fired when they say we plan to right size our manufacturing operations to align with the new strategy. So right sizing is their fancy way of saying downsizing. And the information that I need as a reader is definitely buried, first of all, and second of all, there's so much information that I do not need. In contrast to the Microsoft memo, there's one more memo I want to show you, which is a long memo from FIU. Memos are generally short, but they can be long if there's a lot of information to pass along. In this case, this is a memo that FIU sent out again to the university community. And in this case, it's from the FIU police chief. Again, the subject is very specific. In this case, the subject and the date are switched in order, but that doesn't really matter. To and from are always at the beginning, but some people switch the date and the subject. I generally put the subject last, the way it would be in an email, but it doesn't really matter. The subject is very specific. This is about enhanced active shooter training in August, okay, preparing to save ourselves from mass shooters. Okay, and there's going to be a training for that. And in this first sentence, again, they tell us the details we need to know. Continuing our efforts to improve safety on campus, we are announcing the next round of mandatory trainings. There was no dear so-and-so. We just told us right away from the subject and the first sentence what this is all about. And then the email is short block paragraphs that tell me what I need to know. And they bold the information that they want to stand out. Participants are expected to attend only the training for the building what they're assigned to work at. Okay, a separate email is going to be sent to everybody else. Please note that on training day there will be a lot of police on campus. Please note that there's going to be realistic sounding shots fired. So you need to know that you will hear something that sounds a lot like a real gunshot. Updated training dates are listed below. And below that, you can see all the dates very neatly formatted in a way that's easy to find my building and the date I need to know, right? So this is not in paragraph form because paragraph form would be very hard to read. It's a bolded, very well formatted list so that I can scan for the information I need. Maybe I'm in PC and I know now I'm on Wednesday, August 15th. Okay, and again, the closing. If you have any questions about the shooter training program, if you have any questions about the schedule, and then we look forward to working with every member of the FIU faculty and staff to make our campus safer and our community more resilient. Thank you, and no signature at the end. All right. Okay, so that's the basics of memos. And I think you should understand generally what the memos look like and what they do based on these examples. Now, next I'm going to cover a couple examples of letters. Again, your book does a pretty good job. It's just a little on the short side. Letters are much more formal. If you get a letter from your job, it's usually to announce something really formal, like a change in your benefits, like your health insurance, or you're getting hired, or you're getting fired. Generally, you won't get too many letters from your work to you unless it's like something sort of serious. But they can be sent internally from somebody in the company to somebody in the company. But generally, they are more often written from someone in the company to someone like a customer or from a customer to the company. So they are usually external. Okay, and letters can be written for a variety of reasons. There's a few basic ones. You're trying to sell something. You're which we call a sales letter. You're trying to ask for something like money, which we call a claim letter. You're responding to someone's request for something, which is what we call an adjustment letter. Okay, and these are sort of the basic types of information that you get in a letter. Letters usually are in the professional world are written in block paragraph, and they have addresses at the top, and we'll go over a couple examples of that. But because they are generally written to customers and from customers, one of the really key things here is tone and making sure that you're saying things in the most professional and most polite way possible. So I'm going to go over some examples that will hopefully help you understand letters better. All right, guys, so I'm just going to go over some example letters with you and go over the formatting and some examples of how they work. They will help you with the assignments in this week. So letters are the most formal of the different kinds of correspondence, and for that reason, people often try to sound overly formal when they write them, which is a mistake because that makes it hard for the reader to understand some of the words that you're using and the way you're using them. It's always better to write direct, simple, clear language. Just say what you're trying to say in the easiest way to say it. Don't sound overly complicated because there's no reason to. Okay, a couple of things. Addresses are always at the top of a letter. And the way it always works is my address first, their address second. This is similar to an envelope. When I'm writing an envelope to send out a letter, I would put my address up here and their address here. Well, when you're reading the envelope, you're also going to see that my address is first, their address is second. That's the same thing here. My address first, their address second. In between, you would have the date, or you could put the date after the second address. Either one is fine. It's a personal preference, and your company might have a preference. Now, about my address at the top, if I'm writing from my company might have some kind of logo at the top of the letter, which would have my company's address underneath the logo. And if that's the case, I would not type out my address again. But I also wouldn't invent logos. If you are a single person writing from home, not from your company, just write out the address. Don't go on your computer and create a logo. Just write out your address. Okay, another thing, just write dear so-and-so. Don't be overly complicated with to whom it may concern or whatever else. Just dear so-and-so. And the same thing down here, you want to end your letter with sincerely. Most of the time, sometimes students will try to be overly creative with the way they end a letter with like respectfully yours, yours truly, forever yours. And some of those are kind of intimate. They're kind of a better way to end a love letter than a professional letter. So you want to be really careful with how you end the letter. Sincerely is always a very safe option. If you are friends with the person you are writing the letter to, you could end it with best wishes or kind regards. But honestly, sincerely is the best option. Okay, notice that everything on the page lines up on the left, and these are block paragraphs, so I'm not indenting. I am putting everything all the way to the left. Instead, I skip a line between paragraphs to show where a paragraph ends and the next one begins, instead of indenting at the beginning of the paragraph as you would in less formal writing, or you may have learned to do in essay writing for class. We don't do that in professional writing. We just write in professional block paragraphs. Now, this is an example of a cover letter. A cover letter is a letter that you write with your resume, and you send it explaining the job you want, why you think you're qualified, and what you want them to notice about your resume. So it's a way of selling yourself. It's very similar to a sales letter in some ways, and it's This is a well-organized one, right? They start by identifying what they're applying for. They go over their qualifications, and then they ask to speak to the person in charge when they can to talk about the job more. Okay, and then they close the letter. Now, a note about the way they close the letter: there should be more space in between the end and the typed name so that you could print and sign in pen. So typically we would write sincerely, and then we would type our name, and we would hit enter 4 times in between so that after we print it out, we have enough space to come with a pen and sign our names. So I should have enough space to sign here, which it doesn't look like I do. But other than that, this letter is very good. Now, this is an example of a claim letter. A claim letter is a letter that you send explaining a claim that you have for either money or a product. In other words, you're saying, hey, you owe me money, or hey, you owe me a product. Companies send these to each other, and you can send it to a company saying, we paid for this and we didn't get it, we paid for it and we got something defective, we feel like you owe us money, we feel like you owe us a replacement product, something like that. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of these examples. So they have the address at the top, and this is my address, their address at the bottom, this is the person who gets the letter, and then the date in between, which again, it could have come here instead and that would have been fine. And they keep it simple with Dear Mr. Brown. So on August 1st, I bought a Rough and Ready Model 600 mountain bike from your store. When I got the bike home, I noticed that the front tire was soft. I used a hand pump to inflate the tire. After riding the bike less than a mile, the tire was soft again. I brought the bike back to your shop on 8/2. You tested the tire and told me it was fine and filled it with air. The tire is still losing air. Every time I ride the bike, I need to pump the tire. I left detailed messages on your voicemail on 8/4 and 8/5, and you have not returned my phone calls. I am enclosing a copy of your store warranty. It states that your store will replace defective parts on a bike within the first 30 days of purchase. According to your written policy, I am entitled to a new front tire. Please call me to arrange a time for me to bring the bike in for repair. If I don't hear from you, I will contact the local Better Business Bureau to resolve this problem. Thank you for taking care of this. Sincerely. Now, other than this little threatening line at the end, threatening to report them, the letter's pretty good. This indicates that they're very, very angry, but otherwise it's good. They explain, I bought the bike and you tried to fix it. It's still not working. And then also that I am going to need a replacement or a repair, or else I'm going to take other measures. Okay, so it's organized, and then thanks them. Now there should be 4 spaces here so that I have enough space to sign, but otherwise this is a very good letter. All right, 2 more quick letters. So again, this one's a pretty good claim letter. It's very short, but it gets to the point. So the address of the sender, address of the reader, date here, dear so-and-so. As someone who has worked with your company for over 3 years, we were very disappointed to see the documents you produced for our latest publicity campaign. As our written agreement stipulated, we expected full-color leaflets with fancy explanatory texts, but instead we found the black and white photos had been included in the prepared leaflets. I think you will agree that a communication problem exists. We would like you to send out a photographer to provide us with the promised colored coverage or provide us with a refund. Yours truly. So they go over what they need to go over to explain why they believe they are entitled to either a refund or better product. They agreed to colored photos and they received black and white ones. And they have, in this case, left enough room here for the signature like they should. This yours truly is a little bit informal. We want to keep it simple. Yours truly implies that they are giving themselves to that person, which is very intimate for a professional letter. And there's places where there's too much space. They hit enter too many times. But other than that, the letter is overall very good and shows us a good organized letter. Last letter is an example of an adjustment letter. Now, an adjustment letter is what you get back after sending a claim letter. If I say, hey, you owe me money, or hey, you owe me a product, the person writes back to you saying, so sorry, this is what we'll give you, or they write back saying, here's why we don't think we owe you anything. So here's an example of an adjustment letter. So address of the sender, address of the reader, and in this case we have the date after the two addresses, which is correct too. Dear Mr. Davis, I want to apologize for the mistake we made in sending you the wrong bicycle. We take order fulfillment very seriously and are investigating the cause of this incident. In the meantime, we wish to send you the bicycle you ordered along with a prepaid shipping voucher to send back the incorrect bike as a token of our appreciation for your business. We also want to include a $100 gift card that you can use in our store. Again, we apologize for the inconvenience. Thank you for your business. So short, to the point, well organized. Here we have an apology. Here we have what we're going to do for you, and then a thank you for being our customer. Sincerely, okay, typed out name, typed out title if you have one, and enough space to sign afterwards. So this is a very good letter, and you don't have to write more than you need to, but don't leave your customer with questions. Tell them everything they need to know, but you don't have to go on and on and on just to fill up the letter. A short letter is okay. All right, last thing I'm going to go over is the direct approach versus the indirect approach. Now, 9 times out of 10 in professional communication, you're going to use the direct approach. So when I went over memos, I talked about the direct approach a lot. In the direct approach, in your subject or in the first line, you state your reason for writing immediately. Then the rest of the document gives supporting information. So if I'm going to tell you that there's a power outage, then the rest of the document is going to tell me what you need to know about that power outage. But I tell you right away there's going to be a power outage. Every once in a while, you're going to use the indirect approach. In the indirect approach, you basically switch these two, okay? You're going to give the supporting information, then explain why you're writing. The reason you would use the indirect approach is you're going to use it to deliver bad news. Okay, so when I'm using the direct approach, again, that's the subject line of the first sentence of the email, letter, memo, identifying the reason for writing, and this is what we're going to use 9 times out of 10. But every once in a while, I need to tell somebody something they really don't want to hear. And if I'm thinking about my reader and how my reader wants to hear bad news, you don't want to hear bad news in the very first sentence. So, for example, if I'm writing you to explain to you that you're fired, I'm not going to say, Dear Diego, you're fired, right? That's really not the way I would do it. Instead, I would take the time to go over how there's been cutbacks at the company, how we've tried to avoid laying off people, and I would basically give all of my reasons for why I have to fire Diego before I tell Diego that he's fired. So that by the time I get to that news, he understands what's coming. So, for example, if I'm going to tell someone that I am relocating them to a different part of the company, I would do the same thing. I would explain what is happening that's going to cause me to shut down their part of the company and say, Dear Joanna, as you know, our blank division hasn't been doing that well. As you know, last year we tried to do this, this, and this to bring up sales. We've done everything we can to bring up sales. But unfortunately, we have to close your division, which means we're going to have to relocate you to a different part of the company. So when you're telling someone something that they really, really don't want to know, really bad news, you're going to tell them the supporting information first and then the reason for writing. All other times, you would say right away why you're writing and then give the supporting information. You have to attend this training, and here's everything you need to know about the training. So if you're just reporting information, you want to use this one, which is what you're going to be doing a lot of the time in technical and professional writing, just reporting information. But for those few times where you have to deliver bad news, you're going to use the indirect approach. So the indirect approach, again, you're going to use it to deliver bad news. You're setting up the context for bad news. Then you state the bad news. And here's a key point. Move back to nice things right afterwards. So you also don't want to end on the bad news. You don't want to start on the bad news. You don't want to end on the bad news. We sometimes refer to this as like a bad news sandwich. So in the example, when I say, Joanna, all these things are happening. We tried and tried and tried, but we can't make it work. So bad news, we're going to close your division and we have to relocate you. But then I would want to end the letter by saying some nice things like you're really valuable to the company. We're sure you're going to fit in just fine in your new division. We're so happy to have you with us, or something like that. So you want to move back to nice stuff. Another thing is you don't want to repeat the bad news or spend longer stating it than necessary. So one mistake that a lot of students make is that they'll just keep saying it over and over and over and over again when they're writing a document, like, you're fired. Did we mention you're fired? We're so sorry we have to fire you. We really apologize for having to fire you. You don't want to just keep repeating it over and over and over again. And if you can say it in one sentence, say it in one sentence and move back to the nice statements. Don't say it in 6 sentences, because you don't want your reader to be focusing on the bad news. You want to try to set them up for the bad news, state the bad news, and then manage their mood, right? So you want them to end the letter or memo or email feeling okay about the decision. So you're going to move back to nice statements, okay? So in this unit, there's going to be times where you have to deliver bad news, and you need to decide if your memo or letter or email is an example of you reporting information, and if it's easier for your reader to know the information right away and then just get supporting details after, or are you telling them something they really don't want to hear, and would it be better for you to set up the context first, state the bad news, and then move back to nice statements? So think about that when you're writing and see which of the two organizations work best for you. All right, if you have any questions, let me know.